So Sam and I got to talking at that event, and he was very creative in the way that he was marketing his beers. He was still a tiny little, like he was coming to Philly to sell his beers still at that time.
Cool.
Right? He and I got to be very friendly. He loved the way that I was doing something unusual in the way I was marketing wine, and he was doing something unusual in the way he was marketing beer. And the way we were talking to each other, it was like, most beer people don't realize that wine drinkers are also their audience. They're not even talking to that group, but they should be. And me, on the other side, I was trying to get beer drinkers interested in wine, right? So we had that whole, like, I got some of my peanut butter and his chocolate, and he got his chocolate and my peanut butter, and before you know, we end up doing things together.
Welcome back to Brew Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Richie Tevlin, joined as always by Evan Blum. And today we have on Marnie Old. So just a little background, leading wine sommelier across the country. You're a best-selling author, former director of wine at the French Culinary Institute in Manhattan. So I have read your book before. I know you're part of the Philly Beer Fest, but I guess a month and a half ago when I was at Brewers in Pennsylvania meeting, it was Monday morning. I was tired. I was hungover, and you came in and just gave like a pump-up speech for Pennsylvania beer. And I immediately texted Evan. I was like, we have to get her on the podcast.
Well, and I think because I am better known as a wine expert, and certainly I understand why my bio and my resume would suggest that. But when you're based in Pennsylvania, when you're based in Philadelphia, of all places, wine and beer are a lot more alike than they are different. First of all, they're both fermented beverages where the magic comes from the yeast more than from the raw ingredients. Right?
Yeah.
And it's just that, I found a way to make my career in the beverage that people find more confusing and are willing to pay people to explain it to them, which is not beer. So it's wine. I've been making my living on that side of it, on explaining complicated alcohol topics in a kind of fun, over 21 Sesame Street kind of a way. Yeah. That's my job, basically. And it doesn't matter whether it's wine or beer or cocktails or spirits. If you've got alcohol questions, I'm your girl.
Well, I think that's what you kind of explained. It's like wine is sometimes intimidating. And for me, yes, learning about beer, there's a lot to learn about. But there's different styles, and I think that it's easier for somebody to just naturally get in without somebody explaining it to them.
Also less expensive.
Less expensive. It's almost less nuanced. And I feel like I've heard you like kind of give speeches online, and it's like, you break it down into like something that I understand. And I appreciate that.
Well, it is true that the wine world has had a very, very bad habit of speaking its own language to its own acolytes and not really trying to reach out to other audiences. And part of that is language based. And I'm really lucky. Like in my background, my dad was a geography professor. There's no food product on earth more than wine that is geography specific, right? It tastes of the place where you grew the grapes, which is not as dramatic with beer.
Yeah.
But then my mom was a kindergarten teacher. And so I inherited this like explaining gene. I'm really good at taking complicated ideas, figuring out what is the barrier to comprehension, and then using a different framing to try and get people over that barrier, right?
Yeah.
So that's been my specialty my whole life. When I was a sommelier in Philadelphia, it's something that led me into the next phase of my career as a consultant, as an educator, a writer, a teacher. And now it's helping me write books and columns for magazines and, travel around the world as an expert speaker. It's great.
Not bad. I think you're living the dream that a lot of our listeners want, just to drink and write and talk about alcohol.
Well, one word of caution here for those who are aiming for my career. I will put one little note in here, which is that when your job is as fun as mine, you have to be prepared that you're competing with people who will do it for free because it's so cool.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that does kind of cap your earning potential a little bit. What can I say? But it is awesome. And I chose it for myself, and I don't want to talk anyone else out of it. Just be aware.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming in. So I guess should we start from, just the beginning? I know we want to get into the beer stuff, but can we talk about how you got into wine and then just go through the whole wine?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, I kind of fell into this sideways because I I'm originally Canadian. I grew up in Canada. I'm from a place called Winnipeg, maybe another hot accent. But when I moved here at 17, it was to live with my boyfriend. I had met him up there. He could only work legally in the U.S. I was a dual citizen by pure fluke. So literally the September after I graduated high school, I got on a plane and I moved to Philadelphia at age 17 and got a job working in restaurants. Because what else do you do when you're that young? And I was pretty good at it. And I, within a couple of years, moved into better and better restaurants. I felt better when the food coming out of the kitchen was of higher quality. And I pretty quickly got into high-end, like working the Four Seasons, right? Kind of restaurants, right? And one of the things that's super cool in high-end fine dining restaurants is that you're selling the drinks as well as the food. You need to know your stuff on the food, but they're also training you in the wine because they want you to upsell. They want you to get a few bottles of wine. Yeah,
that's where they make the money, right? Yeah.
And I had a couple advantages. One was that background in geography. Like I understood more so than I think most people my age, which parts of the world are warm, which ones are cold. That's relevant in the wine world. Which places have mountains, which ones have beaches, you know, like all that stuff. Yeah. But the other advantage I had was that in Canada, there are two official languages, French and English. And I was from an English-speaking family in an English-speaking part of the country. But my parents were both educators, and they understood that kids have one opportunity to learn another language, and that's before they're 10 years old, right?
Yeah, tell me about it.
So we were sent to an experimental program called French Immersion. My brother and I, from kindergarten to grade 9, every class we had every day in school was in French, except for 1 hour of English a day. So in elementary school, that 1 hour was grammar. You know, but when we got to junior high school, that became literature, like Shakespeare and stuff like that. But speaking French every day, I am very, very fluid in the language. I understand the conjugation naturally. It doesn't seem weird. I don't have to think about it. I instinctively know which nouns are masculine and feminine, which is really hard, right? But being able to credibly pronounce French of all languages put me in a really good position in the wine world.
Definitely.
Because it's true that, yes, you know, the Italians make wine and the Spaniards make wine and the Germans make wine and all of that. But France, they're at the pinnacle. That's ground zero for fine wine as we know it. Yeah. And the entire business is organized around their systems, their wording, their language. Right?
Wow.
And so being able to just, at 21, like I was barely legal to sell alcohol, and I could pronounce Chassagne Montrachet properly. I could sell
I can't even pronounce products,
that, right?
Say,
So that was a huge advantage for me. So I had these legs up in the fine wine world in that I understood geography, I could speak French, and I found wine fascinating. Like I thought I didn't like it for the first few years that I was a waitress. They would pour me stuff that we were selling by the glass and it was gross and I didn't like it. And I'm like, ew, I don't like, name your wine, Chardonnay, Cabernet, whatever it is. And then they start training you on the good shit at the Four Seasons, and you're like the server, and the winemakers are coming in and giving you a flight of all their wines from the Chablis region or from Napa Valley or whatever it is. And you're like, oh, it's not that I don't like Chardonnay. It's that I don't like cheap rot gut Chardonnay. That makes so much more sense. And so being exposed to wine at a high level like that, it just piqued my curiosity. And I did that thing that a lot of people who earn cash tips do, which is, you know, walk around with a lot of money in your pocket, right? And I made a deal with myself. I was trying to learn more to get better at selling the wine because it was, I mean, I was earning $300 or $400 a night in tips.
Wow,
yeah. Crazy. But I would take $50 and I would walk into one of the PLCB's specialty stores. They used to have one, it was an experimental store in the Bourse. And I'd walk into this tiny little boutiques focused on specialty wines with $50. And my goal was to find a wine I had never heard of that, you know, was completely foreign to me, that cost somewhere between $40 and $50, take it home, taste it, and then look up everything I could about that wine. And this is like pre-easy access to internet.
Yeah.
I was using books to learn this stuff, but it just...
Were there books established on wine at that point?
There were reference books. So they were like encyclopedias, basically.
Yeah.
So I started accumulating all of these books. And I'm a nerd. I'm just such a geek. I found this stuff fascinating. But also I had an experience while I was at the Four Seasons working there that was just earth-shaking for me, and it couldn't have come at a better time to open up career avenues for me. There is one wine beginner book that outsells all of the others. If you look online still today, it's the best-selling beginner wine book in the world. It's called The Windows on the World Wine Course. And it was written by the sommelier of the World Trade Center restaurant called Windows on the World, Kevin Zraly. Now, Kevin, at that time, had already pretty much retired and had other sommeliers working the restaurant. He was just like the figurehead, the name on the door, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he had started teaching. He wrote a book, and there was a hotel at the bottom of the World Trade Center in one of the other buildings. I think it was World Trade Center 3. That, if you remember, there was bombing in the parking below that complex of buildings long before 9/11.
Yeah.
It was about 10 years earlier. I'm trying to think. This would have been 1993, I think.
Yeah.
Was the first World Trade Center bombing, and it damaged the hotel where he was teaching his wine course. It was a wildly popular continuing ed type class once a week. And yeah, some people in the hospitality business who wanted to be sommeliers like me would take that class, but you also had like Wall Street like hedge funders and just rich people who wanted to learn about wine would take this class, and it was amazing. You would go, and it would be 2 hours on a Tuesday, and you would sit down and you would taste 8 to 10 wines, and it was so well curated. And Kevin had been a kindergarten teacher like my mom before he got into the restaurant business. He was an incredible storyteller. He was so good as an educator, helping people break down the barriers to understanding wine. It was fascinating for me. I'm trying to think, if that was 1993, then I was 23 or 24 at this point. Now,
were you the youngest person in that class then?
I was pretty close to it, for sure. Because what happened was he had been teaching his Windows on the World wine course 3 times a year in the hotel at the base of the World Trade Center for years.
Yeah.
And then the bombing damaged the hotel that was his space. So he took that class on the road, and for 18 months, he did his classes, one in Philadelphia and one in New Paltz, New York, up on the Hudson, which was closer to his house. And the one in Philadelphia was at the Four Seasons Hotel. And I was the junior server in the fine dining restaurant, the one who was super excited to learn more about wine.
Yeah.
I was covering back bar shifts, so I was, doing unpacking and inventory work. And they were looking for volunteers to run the class. Like, my job was, I took the lead pourer role. My job was to get the wines the week ahead, peel the labels off, photocopy all the handouts, stuff the binders, set the
This is after you had already taken his class in New York?
No, this was my first exposure to his class. He came to the Four Seasons, and because I was one of the lead pourers, I got to work his class. I didn't pay for it. I just had to walk around pouring the wine. And, do the coordination on my own time. Of course, this was not paid work. But it got me into a lifelong pattern of volunteering for things to learn, to get life experience.
Yeah.
This was eye-opening beyond anything I had ever imagined in the world of wine. And I stayed in touch with Kevin. He's been a mentor for me for my whole career. He started inviting me up once he relocated his classes back to Manhattan. I would get on the train and go up just to work a Barolo class or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Just to have that experience and taste those wines, because he was opening really good stuff. So that was just an amazing experience for me to have at that young of an age. And when I left the Four Seasons not long after that and found myself I ended up in a tiny little French restaurant where Vetri is now on Spruce Street, less than 40 seats, tiny place. And it was so small. We didn't have a manager. We didn't have a sommelier because we were all equals, right? Like, we were the servers, but we also answered the phone, took reservations. We did our own dishes, right?
Yeah.
We did everything. We cleaned the bathrooms, okay? There was no hierarchy within the staff. But the guy who did the wine list had to deal with the chef because it was extra work. It was like you had to come and meet salespeople and sample products and make buying decisions and all of this stuff. So Joe, who was in charge of buying for the restaurant, back then, restaurants almost died over the summer because everybody went down the shore.
Yeah.
And so the restaurant would lose income. And so basically the idea was that we would not buy wine all summer and deplete everything in the basement. And then we would do a huge buy in September, and that would be like a fresh new list for the next season.
Yeah.
But it's a lot more work when you do it that way because you have to buy everything all at once. And Joe was not excited because he wanted to be down the shore too. So I made a deal with the chef. I said, look, Joe doesn't want to do this. And it doesn't really pay him enough to make it worth his trouble to keep coming back and meeting with these salespeople. I'll tell you what, here's the deal. I will do this for free. I will design your whole fall wine list. But if after the first 2 months you like what I did and you think I did it well, you start paying me, and you're going to pay me 1.5 times what you were paying Joe. Right? Like,
can I just stop you? Yeah. So is that how normal wine sales work? They have salespeople come in, and then like you're buying it.
It's not normal at all. But our chef and owner was from France, and that might be a little bit more like the way things work in Paris.
Got it.
Oh, wow. Been trained.
Yeah.
Like normally in a restaurant, a manager who is paid a salary, right, is the person who's doing that. In a small place, it might be the general manager. In a place with 3 to 5 managers, there will usually be one who's in charge of
but at like high-end restaurants, you're waiting to taste the wine from the salespeople that come around for each year?
That part of it is how it works.
Okay.
You sit down with the salespeople, you taste the products, you decide which... Like, I'm shopping for a $15 Pinot Noir that I can put on my wine list for $45. What do you got? And, 6 different salespeople come to you with products. You taste through them, and you decide which one you're going to go with.
Okay.
That part of it is still how the business
and
works.
Wine has...
But this whole idea of, like, paying a percentage based on the wine sales and, doing it for free, that's not how it normally works.
Do wineries have, like, wholesale distributors where they sell a bunch of different brands?
Yeah, and it's super complicated because in the United States, we have this ridiculous 3-tier system.
It's the same thing as beer?
Certainly constrains beer. It's worse for wine.
Okay.
Actually,
really?
If you are a winery, whether you're in California or you're in Burgundy in France, right, and you want to sell wine, let's talk about Pennsylvania for a minute because that's where we are, you would need a state level representative here at the distributor level, and then that distributor has to sell it to the PLCB, who can then sell it to the customer,
it's like the 5-tier system,
to the restaurants and hotels and grocery stores that might be able to offer it to the customer. So yeah, it's like multiple levels of middlemen.
That's fun.
Yeah. So that's how I got my start as a buyer. I ended up being in charge of buying wine for one of the top restaurants in the city in terms of cuisine.
Yeah.
I think it was 25, right? Like that is not normal at all.
Definitely.
But because I had those strange, like super lucky experiences, like I have led a charmed life. I've been in the right place at the right time a lot of times. And it put me probably a decade ahead of my peers in terms of the experience that I was getting. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I was recruited by one of the city's top restaurateurs at that time. His name was Neil Stein. And he had this super swanky restaurant on Walnut Street called Striped Bass. And back then it was like, this is the 90s. We were an only seafood restaurant, like no meat on the menu, no steak, no chicken, no burger, right?
Yeah.
And we were selling entrees in the $35 to $55 range back then.
Yeah.
And turning tables 3-4 times on Fridays and Saturdays because the place was the spot where everybody wanted to be and see and be seen. Like it was that place in town for a number of years.
Yeah.
And so I got hired as their sommelier in, this was 1996. And so I would have been 26. Right.
Wow.
And this was the number one, I didn't know it at the time, but the way you judge, like, are you like the most important sommelier in the state of Pennsylvania is not based on how many stars your restaurant has. It's based on how much money you spend on wine. And there was only one business in the state of Pennsylvania that was spending any more money on wine than I was, and it was a hotel, right?
Wow, yeah.
I was in the catbird seat. from that point on, I was the sommelier there for 5 years.
And I'm sorry, I just don't know much about wine. As a sommelier, is your only job to kind of oversee the wine, or you also have like you're kind of a manager there?
You have restaurant management responsibilities.
Okay.
So you might be an opening manager. You might be assigned to close a couple shifts and take the paperwork and the money and all of that stuff. But you have an additional side of responsibilities that are specific to the beverage program.
Cool.
In my case, I was doing the buying, and you also you get the system with Pennsylvania was such that you had to pay a contractor to go and collect your deliveries once a week. So all of your wine for the week would come in on the same day, and you somehow needed to get that organized and shelved and chilled and ready for service in a matter of 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And in this restaurant, I didn't realize how many labor laws I was breaking at the time, but I created a volunteer team among my servers. There were a lot of people who wanted to know more about wine for the same reason I had 5 years earlier. They wanted to be better at selling at tableside.
Yeah, and it's like, why not give back? And
so I created something that we called, the cellar rat team. And these guys would come in. There's like 3 to 5 of them at any given time who would come in on their own time on Thursday afternoons, able to crawl around in the cellar, like helping me pull out all the old boxes and put in the new stuff, and rotate the old inventory, get everything stocked. And we had stickers that told you what bin number it was going to be on the wine list, and did it need to go in this cabinet or that cabinet. It was pretty cool, honestly. And some of those people went on to be top people in the business now. Like right now, the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is based in London, has a chapter in the United States. They've got almost 200 American Master Sommeliers now. But the woman who runs their education program, Melissa Monosoff, was one of my cellar rats.
Wow.
And then I promoted her to sommelier in one of our restaurants, because in the 5 years that I worked there, it started out as one restaurant, and by the end it was 5. So I was the beverage director, and I had 2 full-time sommeliers working under me, plus a paid cellar rat coordinator type person.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I realized that I needed to succeed in my job. I needed my staff to know a lot about wine, because customers are scared to talk to the scary person coming around. They think the sommelier's job is to get them to spend more money, which it isn't. But like I would see people like slam the wine list shut when they saw me come around the corner, because they were worried that I was going to stop and try and sell them something, right? So I needed to make sure my staff were really good at pairing. And with an all seafood restaurant, think about this for a second. People go to restaurants like that, like the super swanky high-end restaurants. They go once a year to celebrate a big deal, like an anniversary, a birthday. You don't know. It could be a big deal that they just signed, like a $5 million deal could have gotten signed.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, they're in an environment where they know what to order in the steakhouse, and they have no idea what to order in the fish house, right? Because they know, like, oh, the big deal Cabernet or the big deal Bordeaux or whatever it is. Like, there's an obvious prestige wine to order if you're having meat as your entree. But when you're having fish all the way through, it just threw people for a loop.
Everything is different.
So more people needed advice, more people needed guidance and suggestions, and more people were comfortable asking for guidance in that environment than in a normal restaurant, for sure, just because of the no meat on the menu thing.
And I guess you want an environment where people are asking questions.
Absolutely. And I was pretty naive back then. I was, probably not marking up the wine as high as I should have been. But then, in fairness, the restaurant ownership should have been giving me some targets to meet. And what we were doing pricing-wise was keeping the place packed. I mean, when we opened, Rouge is still on the square. That was our second restaurant.
Okay,
so I designed the beverage program for Rouge when they opened.
Cool.
We had a place where Park is now that was called Blue. We had one where Tony Luke's is now on 18th Street called Fish Market. And then we had one right next to the Kimmel Center called Avenue B. And in the course of opening and creating wine menus for all of these restaurants, and of course that includes creating the beer list too, creating the cocktail menu, creating all the drink recipes. Like that stuff is all... When you're the beverage director, it's all beverage.
Yeah.
The part that you get I was getting press in national magazines by the end of this. Like Food and Wine magazine ranked 2 of my wine lists among the best in the country when they first came out.
Awesome.
So I was getting like super big props, because also back then, A, I was unusually young. B, I was a girl, right? Which was newsworthy still at that time.
Yeah.
And I was kind of cute. So I photographed well.
Yeah.
Right? And so I was getting quite a lot of attention for the stuff I was doing. But for the wine, right? Like nobody's talking about my beer chops,
Yeah. Cool. Mm-hmm. So from there, then you became
So from there, I in that position. So if you're a distributor in Pennsylvania and you represent all these wines and you have some big deal winemaker coming to town, who do you take them to see? You take them to see the big buyers. I met everybody that I needed to know in that business because I had the most beautiful, gorgeous place, and we sold a metric shit ton of wine. I mean, unbelievable. They knew that if they walked in with an important winemaker, not only would I be nice to the guy and taste the wines, but I would also order 5 or 10 cases.
Yeah.
So it was like a guaranteed, like, attaboy kind of situation for the salesperson, but it also meant that I ended up meeting and having great relationships with some of the top people in the wine business, right? So when I left that job, which was actually, it was 9/11 that made the difference. I was fired right after that, in part because the entire hospitality industry went flat after that. Everybody was scared to eat out.
Yeah.
Nobody was traveling. Nobody was going. It was kind of COVID-ish, COVID light.
Yeah.
And we were at that super high end, like catering to travel more than to local customers.
Yeah.
So we were super sensitive to that. And I was one of the most expensive people.
Definitely,
and so I was among the first to be trimmed. And when I first left that job, I was like, I've now had the number one wine buying job in Pennsylvania for 5 years. I can't go sideways or down. Like, what's the point of that? So at first I was thinking, okay, well, now I need to go and interview
in New York or
Chicago or whatever, right? And at that point I was already getting involved with, should I seek certification as a master sommelier myself, in which case maybe I have to go to Vegas where there's like 12 of them, and they're like a master sommelier factory because you sit down and taste with them if you work in one of their casinos. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I am already, in wine terms, the queen of Philadelphia, right? Not only had I been the number one buyer, so all the salespeople knew me, but years earlier, I had started with a group of local somms. We had a tasting group. We would get together once a month in each other's restaurants, and we would each pick our own pet topic and open a bunch of wines for everybody to taste. And it was sort of like impromptu wine lessons. And a smaller group of us realized, you know what? We all need staff training in our restaurants, but none of us has enough time. What if we divvy this up? Like, Marnie will do it this month and she'll teach about French wines. And then Tim will do it next month and he'll do Tuscan wines. And, Christy will do it the month after that and she'll talk about Sonoma or whatever it is. And that over a year coalesced into a situation where it very quickly became clear that some of us were better teachers than others. And I was one of the 2 best teachers.
Yeah.
And I started working pretty tightly with one guy, Bob Trimble, who was one of the sales representatives at the time. And we basically formed a nonprofit to do wine classes. And at first, most of the people attending were people who wanted to be fine dining waiters or restaurant managers or whatever it was. But of course, the same thing happened in Philadelphia that happened with Kevin Zraly's classes. The customers found out we were doing wine classes and they wanted to come too. And so we're teaching classes at the Union League and, we're doing the same kind of structure, right?
Yeah.
I got involved with this.
What a circle.
It did come full circle. And so I ended up somehow by pure accident, by the time I left Striped Bass, I was the founding education chair of the American Sommelier Association at this point, in part because I was so young and naive. I had no idea how huge a task that was that I took on. But you take big bites at things when you're young and ambitious and nobody has smacked you down yet. And so I had all of this local capital. You know what I mean? Like I had... I started interviewing. I did a couple interviews in New York, and I looked at what they were willing to pay, and I looked at what it was going to cost me to live there, and I'm like, shit, we're talking about me taking like a 40% pay cut, basically, for the privilege of coming up and going from being queen bee in Philly to being at the bottom of the food chain in Manhattan. Like, it did not add up to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to see if I can make a go of my own business. So I started a company with my husband. I did wine consulting. So restaurateurs could hire me to design a wine list for their next project. I did a lot of work for Steven Starr, a lot of independent restaurateurs. I started teaching for the local cooking school, the restaurant school at Walnut Hill College out in West Philly. I was their wine educator there for a while. I was doing corporate entertaining. People would hire me to do wine dinners and wine talks and tastings at parties, like you would hire a band or a magician, right?
Yeah.
Like it was kind of head turning to have like the sommelier in the red sequin dress is going to come and tell us all about these wines. It was fun. People loved it, and I was able to make a living. And I ended up being independent doing that for 17 years.
Wow.
I didn't have a reason to change it. And in that period is when, Beer Fest got started, among other things. The German Society at the corner of 7th and Spring Garden near here had originally hired me to come in and teach German wine classes. And then they were like, oh, do you want to do German beer classes? I'm like, yes, because just saying, on my own time, my own dime, all my favorite wines are German. And all my favorite beers are German too. So I was excited about that. Even though I don't have any German heritage, I don't speak German, I got really tightly wrapped in with them. And part of that was realizing they have this incredible space and it's fully licensed. They have a catering club license, complete with the grandfathered after hours permit. They can serve until 5 a.m. And I'm like, are you flipping kidding me? I can do events here. I managed to I used it as a space for a lot of teaching, for a lot of classes, for a lot of parties, for a lot of events, for a lot of my corporate customers that wanted a place to do something catered. They didn't need a restaurant space, but it just made it so much easier to have like a beautiful, like incredible 19th century building, auditorium, dining room, tavern.
It's beautiful in there.
It's amazing.
Cole out there, he's actually pretty good friends with Mark. and I'm sure he'll tell you about it after, but Mark took us on a tour of the place where I forget what event it was specifically. It might have been, oh gosh. I don't think it was Philly Beer. It wasn't Philly.
It would not have been. You would have remembered that.
Yeah, it was a bit more low key and it was just such a fun time.
It's
so
such
cool
an
there.
amazing space. They talked me into being on the board, and I've been working with them almost 20 years now. It's crazy.
When did you write the books? Was it after you started doing that?
The books all started after I left the restaurant, and my first one is in collaboration with Sam Calagione.
That was your first book you wrote?
That was my first book. Okay. So I have 5, but that was the first one, and that one was actually hilarious. He and I met at Monk's one time because Tom Peters was doing an illicit hemp beer comparison tasting, and I was invited to be a judge because at the time I was still the sommelier at Striped Bass. So I was the big deal wine lady who got invited as the token wine judge at the beer event.
Yeah.
And it's in the back room because, of course, they smuggled in some Dutch, like real hemp beers from Amsterdam going up against American hemp beers that were just made with the seeds. And of course, there was no contest for obvious reasons. But we were grouped in booths in the back room in the bar at Monk's, and the person sitting
next to me.
So
it was you versus everybody,
Sam.
basically?
Yeah. Well, it was a judging panel kind of thing.
Okay.
So we were supposed to taste each beer blind, and it was deadly obvious which ones were American and which ones were, and score them, basically. Okay. And then so it was like an anonymous scoring, and they published the results in Mid-Atlantic Brew News or something like that. I think that article still exists somewhere.
We'll talk to Rich Wagner. He'll find it for us.
So Sam and I got to talking at that event, and he was very creative in the way that he was marketing his beers. He was still a tiny little, like he was coming to Philly to sell his beers still at that time.
Cool.
Right? So he and I got to be very friendly. He loved the way that I was doing something unusual in the way I was marketing wine, and he was doing something unusual in the way he was marketing beer, and the way we were talking to each other. It was like, most beer people don't realize that wine drinkers are also their audience. They're not even talking to that group, but they should be, right? And Sam got that, and he explicitly wanted to do beers that appeal to wine drinkers to try and get them, because he thought that they would be willing to spend more for premium and like trade up. He was absolutely right about that, obviously. I mean, he was well ahead of that curve compared to most brewers in the United States. And me, on the other side, I was trying to get beer drinkers interested in wine, right? So we had that whole like, I got some of my peanut butter and his chocolate, and he got his chocolate and my peanut butter. And before you know, we end up doing things together. The first thing he did, he hired me to come down to his brew pub in Rehoboth and help him design, you know, with wines, there's always what we call the tech sheet, right? That the winemaker puts together, you know, like, oh, this wine is composed of 73% Cabernet Sauvignon and, you know, 12% Merlot, and like all of this detail, right? He wanted to put together wine-style tech sheets about each of his beers, and he wanted me to tell him this beer would appeal to a customer who likes this kind of wine, right? Like, so you want to sell this to a Sauvignon Blanc drinker, this one to a Cabernet Sauvignon drinker, this one to a Pinot Noir drinker, this one to a Rosé drinker, that kind of thing. So he hired me to come down and do a crazy tasting with his team where we tasted every single freaking beer he had, which was a lot because he used to do all that wacky stuff. And by the end, I don't remember exactly how this evening ended, but somewhere in the course of it, we decided that we were going to do a book together. And this whole he said, she said.
The first time ever to be able to get drunk and decide to write a book together.
To be fair, the original title, we were calling it, because this was it gives you a sense of when this happened. Beer is from Mars, wine is from Venus. But we eventually changed that title and it became He Said Beer, She Said Wine. And it was a fun project. We got DK based in London. They do mostly visual books. Like they do all the Star Wars stuff. They do all the eyewitness, encyclopedia stuff, visual stuff. They do not publish any book that is only words on a page. They don't do that. So they loved the idea of the visuals of this. And we came up with this.
It makes it easily digestible, like what you're saying.
Exactly. And it was designed to be fun. It was designed to be silly. It was tongue-in-cheek, obviously. But it was like the beer guy recommends these beers to go with these foods. And the wine lady says, no, he's wrong. You should drink these wines. And I'm right. He's wrong. It would debate. It was this whole like finger-pointing, silly. It was all goofy. And at the end, you know, I recommend a beer and he recommends wine and everybody's happy. But when we came out with that book, that would have been, let me think, 2008. Exactly. Because we started doing, we did a book tour.
Yeah.
And the way we did a book tour was that we were doing beer versus wine dinners around the country. And this was so eye-opening. It was fascinating. We did one at the Great American Beer Festival.
Yeah.
We did them at wine festivals. We did them like all over the place, right? For maybe 6 months in 2008, early 2009. And what we would always do would be 5 beers, like 5 pairs of wine and beer with foods. And people would vote. We would make them vote, like either with hands or ballots or something like that. And it always came down to the last course. Always. Even when we did one in Monks, we somehow, wine won. And it was because Sam brought a faulted beer. I mean, I would have lost that one if he had not screwed that up. But it was shocking that we were always right on the edge. And what it was that so many beer drinkers had never tried putting like beer with food and then wine with the same food and really thought about which one actually do I like better as a partner? Because it wasn't which thing do you like best when you take a first sip.
Yeah.
It was which one enhances, like the idea is we're looking for the two together to be better than either one of them was apart. And which one does it better? And people took it so seriously. It was great. We had fantastic conversations. It was just an amazing experience. And I met a lot of the top people in the beer world doing this with Sam, because at that time he was hitting the heights of his popularity. He was negotiating that show that he did. The TV show was in the works at that point, but not in production at that stage. So I got a kind of high level introduction to the whole universe of craft brewing in the United States, and at a fairly high level, because I wasn't just the girl from Philly. I was like Sam's co-author.
Yeah.
It got me into a lot of very interesting dinner parties.
That's fun.
Yeah. So that was the first book. And then from there, the rest were wine specific and on my own.
Cool.
This episode of the Brewdat podcast is brought to you by Zilka & Co., your trusted regional brewing supply partner. Family owned for over 100 years of business, Zilka delivers world-class products at competitive prices with flat $5 delivery fee. No pallet or liftgate charges thanks to their own fleet of regularly maintained trucks. With locations in Allentown and Hunker and a technical brewer on staff, they provide the expertise and service your brewery deserves. Reach out to Brad Adelson in the show notes and let him know Brewdat sent you.
So that was, I guess, before the Philly Beer Fest.
I think so. We did our first beer fest in either 2011? I think it was 2011.
And it was always at the German Society?
It was always at the German Society. And the very first one was, it was when they were launching Philly Beer Week.
Cool.
Oh,
And
wow, okay.
that's also before it was in June, like it was kind of earlier in the year. And we were doing it as a MyFest. I think we tried to do a MyFest event. And it was a great idea. We had this concept that we wanted to focus on Pennsylvania beers, but we did not want all of the beers. We wanted the ones that were made in German styles only. So lagers, Weizens, Bocks, we did not want IPAs and stouts and just Belgian styles. We wanted to showcase specifically Pennsylvania's German brewing heritage because the German Society is all about German American culture.
Yeah.
And so this was a perfect way to talk about something that I think most Pennsylvanians and Philadelphians don't realize, that this is the place where Philadelphia's Germantown neighborhood was the portal to all German immigration to the Americas for almost 400 years.
Yeah.
Like every boat of German immigrants was coming here, not to New York, not going to Chicago or something like that. They were coming here, and it's because this is where German culture was.
Yeah.
Like the German Society was founded in the 1760s. And they will, when you do the tour with them, go through the library, they'll show you documents showing there were more German speakers in Philadelphia when the Declaration of Independence was published than there were English speakers.
That's crazy.
It was published word for word in the German newspaper 3 days before it was published in English. People just do not understand. This was a mixed German-English city for much of its early history. Wow. And that's also why the first lager beers in the Americas were brewed in Philadelphia. You're not very far from the historical marker here from where
2 blocks.
John Wagner brewed the first one. And this is because of that, basically German-style brewing started here and expanded from here. This is where the best German-style beers were being made until the railroad broke everything, in the early 20th century, that all that stuff moved further west because it was easier. If you're going to be a national brewer, you wanted to be able to get to both coasts and not have to put something on a full coast-to-coast travel schedule, right? But anyhow, we wanted to celebrate the unique role of German-style beers in Pennsylvania because I had been traveling at this point, Great American Beer Festival, doing all these events with Sam. And it was very clear to me that outside of Pennsylvania, craft brewers in the United States were brewing British or Belgian, and it was almost exclusively ales.
Yeah.
And I understand why. You brew them much faster, right? You can start making an ale today and be selling it maybe by the end of next week. With German styles, you got a few months ahead of you before you can get that product bottled and out the door and sold. So I understand why, but it was kind of like our beer flag in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia area had extra colors in our rainbow that you couldn't find when you went outside of this area. And I kind of wanted to popularize that and get Philadelphians proud of something for a change, because this city always has such a freaking chip on its shoulder. It's ridiculous. So that was the original concept behind Beer Fest at the German Society. As it happens, at the time, I was connected with a lot of bars through my husband where the bartenders, a lot of them were Philly roller derby athletes that were in our social circle. And somehow we came up with this concept. I was working with Bill Kovleski from Victory Brewing Company, who at that time was founding the organization that is now called the Brewers of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
A nonprofit also, but a trade association whose primary job is lobbying and getting rules changed in Harrisburg to make it better for not just brewers, but beer drinkers in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So that group had just formed, right? And we had the nonprofit of the roller derby. And we had the nonprofit of the German Society. And I'm like, ha, 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 make this into one big, beautiful thing. And it is our annual event that we work on together. The German Society provides the venue and the liquor license. The Brewers of PA helped us populate the event with brewers who were willing to donate beer, because back at that time, we were being heavily discouraged from doing a donation event. We were being pushed to do it more like a commercial event where we would have to buy all the beer. But that just means you don't have a budget for live music, and you can't do all the cool things that make a fest fun, right? So the Brewers of PA helped us present the opportunity to their membership in a way that made sense as a marketing project. Like, nobody's getting paid their full rate here, including our bands, including our dancers, including everything. We're all doing this like it's a win-win thing, right? Like, we're all going to collaborate. The roller derby provides they're our labor force. I mean, they show up with 30 or 40 athletes, and some are like friends and family too, but they're like our volunteer staff for the day, and half of them work in bars and restaurants anyway, so they're rock stars.
Yeah.
And we put together this event that just grew and grew and grew and grew over the years. We're now, and I think next year will be our 13th annual Philly Beer Fest. And just so anybody at home wants to look this up, it's not Philly Beer Fest spelled in English. There's actually a knockoff, a look-alike wannabe beer fest that has kind of taken that name and tried to run with it. We are Philly Beer Fest, spelled the German way, BIERFEST, all is one word. So you can find us at phillybeerfest.org. But this event has become everybody's favorite. Like, when I talk to the brewers, they love that it's German specific, because what does that mean? We've got 1,000 lager lovers in one building, right? And when you talk to people who make beer for a living, of course, everybody, enjoys the bells and whistles involved in some of the specialty styles and understands why they, turn heads. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to try and make a really good lager, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately, that is what, when you say beer, that is what people think of as beer, right? Like, I mean, it was Frank Zappa, right, who said you can't be a country if you don't have a beer, right? When you say beer in that context, people mean pale lager, right? That's exactly what they mean. They don't recognize, an IPA or like a peanut butter chocolate stout, right, as being beer. Those are kind of fringe products.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the idea of going back to the region's roots, because a lot of brewers, as you know, have family heritage that is German too. That's one of the other things that's strong in Pennsylvania, is that we have a higher percentage of people of German heritage living in Pennsylvania than anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
And that comes from that history, right? Like that's who settled Pennsylvania, basically. It's pretty cool. It's a great event. Now, over time, it grew. We started out with only Pennsylvania brewers making German-style beers, and we've never let in brewers from other states like New Jersey, Delaware. It's only been Pennsylvania focused, because the Brewers of PA is a Pennsylvania only organization. German Society of Pennsylvania is a Pennsylvania only organization, so it made sense. But at a certain point, we realized we need imports, and we were getting bigger, and we needed more space. So we kind of expanded outside the German Society. We could only sell about 650 tickets when we were using that building, because there's 4 floors in there, but there's still limitations. But we're right next door to another cultural club, the Latvian Society, that also has a liquor license, is
that place
immediately
is also
adjacent,
awesome.
has a door that we can get in from our property through their side door without going out on the front in the sidewalk. And when we put the two together, we can sell 1,000 tickets. So it's a now our event, one building is focused on Pennsylvania brewers making German styles, and the other is German brewers making German styles.
Cool.
And we've got all the best now. We've got Eyinger has their own lounge, their own it's almost like a little speakeasy bar. We have, just great support from the German importers. At first they were a little skeptical, and I'm like, no, trust me, you need to come to this event.
Yeah.
You need to come to this event.
Yeah.
And they all love it. They all love it. I get more repeat. I'm getting to the point where I can't accommodate everybody who wants to be showing their beer at Beer Fest anymore. I'm having to get very creative, fit everybody in.
That's fun. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
So I guess you brought some beers for us. You wanted to talk about.
I did. Well, I wanted to tell a story, actually, because that's what I do. I teach and talk about wine and beer, and I try to do it in a way that is useful. So I thought we would talk about not just the history of lager, right?
Yeah.
In the world, because it started in Germany in the 1500s, and we have a beer here that was first brewed in 1589 from Hofbrauhaus Munich, which is a Bavarian dunkel that in English we usually call these a Munich dunkel. In Germany they call it an Altbayerisch dunkel, which just means like high Bavarian dunkel. Same thing. It's two different languages. And then I know this sounds crazy, but I brought a Yuengling porter, and I saw those eyebrows go up when I pulled this out of my bag, guys. But I know people don't take Yuengling seriously as a brewer, but this beer was on their original list when they first opened in 1829. This was one of the 2 current beers that they still sell that they've been brewing since that time.
We've had Tom Kehoe and some other like, I want to say old heads on, like original OG craft beer people, and pretty much exclusively they say like, I was drinking Yuengling porter back
Absolutely. Then. And part of it is because it says porter, and we now know like porter is an ale style. It was started in the UK. However, this has been called porter since the beginning, but it is a black lager. It is fermented as a lager. That's one of the reasons why you can't taste it side by side with porters and stouts. It's a completely different dimension of style because it's more crisp, it's more refreshing, it's more malt, more clean malt rather than the fruity malt that you get with ale fermentations. So ancient style from Germany. These were the first lagers brewed in Bavaria. In the 1500s was a couple hundred years before they figured out how to make pale malt. So pale beer as we know it today wasn't possible until the Industrial Revolution because they needed to be able to calibrate the heat in the malting process. Anytime before the early 1800s, beer was always brown. Beer was always dark.
It's funny because like people that don't understand or don't know the history of beer think that like pale lagers were the original beer, and then we started brewing everything else. And it's just the complete like this is new school beer. Yeah,
beer started out brown and sludgy. Yeah, and it was always ale for hundreds and hundreds of years. But then in the 1500s in Bavaria, we saw the innovation of this style that we now know of as lager. So we tend to think of the rainbow of styles available to us on a beer menu as like lager being a thing, but it's actually a category. Like every beer that you drink is either an ale family or a lager family based on the type of yeast used.
Yeah.
And ale yeasts were historically the ones that dominated throughout Europe. But lager is a hybrid between one of the parents was an ale yeast, and we only recently did the genetic testing to discover who the other parent was that created what we now know as lager yeast. Turns out to have come from South America, from a type of tree that only grows in Patagonia, from the little leaf galls that grow in the tree canopy. Those kinds of introductions of new organisms weren't possible until the exploration and age of
So do they know were the lagers brewed in South America first, or somehow like things got fruit or something got brought over from South America?
Many types of yeast can ferment. Right.
Okay.
There are all sorts of wild yeasts that can do ferment. Like lambic, for example, is wild yeast fermentation. Just throw open the windows and let the night air bring whatever it brings. Right. That is possible anywhere on planet Earth with any sugar-based liquid. You can ferment it into an alcohol drink.
Yeah.
Right. So that would happen with all sorts of different kinds of botanical ingredients. What we know is lager, though, this idea of the hybrid between the ale and the Patagonian yeast that created something that brewers will always discuss as bottom fermenting yeast. What that really means is that ale yeasts float and they're active on the surface. And because they're active on the surface, they can get the food that they need, the sugary liquid is below them, and the oxygen that they need is easily accessible from the air. And so that speeds up their metabolism. So they act really quickly. It's a hotter, faster, more violent and turbulent fermentation when you're using ale yeast. That's why it goes faster. Basically the yeasts are feeding and reproducing. And then there's more of them. So then they feed and reproduce and feed and reproduce and feed and reproduce and feed and reproduce. And the warmer it is, the hotter it is, the faster it goes, the faster it goes, the hotter it gets, the hotter it gets, the faster it goes. And before you know it, all the food has been depleted. Those yeasts die and will fall as sediment, right? Lager yeast is different. It does not float at the surface. It sinks to the bottom. And because of that, it has a hard time getting going. It can't quite get the speed and the heat. It doesn't work the same way. My theory about this, and I've talked to a couple scientists who say this is not crazy, is that because the air is not, there is oxygen in the liquid, H2O, either like, but the organism has to break apart the H from the O to get the oxygen for its life cycle, right? So it's having to do more work to go through the feed and reproduce cycle. So what happens is it slows it down. And because it's slower, it's cooler. And because it's cooler, it does not gather speed and momentum the same way. So lager fermentations are long, slow, cool fermentations.
Yeah.
That take a long time. And that's one of the reasons why ales, when you talk about ales, the flavors that we associate with ales are generated by that turbulence, by that heat, you get different chemical reactions. You get more generation of esters, of smells and tastes of things that were not present in the raw material. Like, you know how some ales you can smell it and you're like, wow, that smells like cherries. And you know there's no cherries used to make the beer. It's a fruitiness that comes from the ale. Or like Hefeweizen from Germany, that banana and clove smell is not anyone adding bananas and cloves. That's generated by that yeast strain. And it's part of if you do not get to that kind of turbulent, high energy stage of fermentation, you don't generate those esters. So what happens is when you have a long, slow, cool lager fermentation, what do you taste? You taste the grain, you taste the malt, you taste the hops, you taste the water. You don't taste the yeast.
Yeah.
Right? You don't taste the effects of the yeast. There's none of that generation of new smells and tastes that weren't present in the raw material. So that's why lager fermentation is so crisp. That's why it's so refreshing. You get that. It's also why it's so unforgiving as a brewer. You have to have your shit together to brew lager, because you make any miscalculation, you can taste the mistake.
Yeah.
Right? With ale, there's all that shit happening. You know, you got stuff you can hide behind, right?
Yeah.
With lager, you need precision, you need exceptional hygiene, you need really a lot of skill. It's like hand stitching a white suit, right? From across the room, somebody can see one stitch out of place, right? Whereas the ale is more like the black suit. Everything gets hidden just by the color, right? So what I did is I brought 3 dark lagers, because historically all beers were dark. The original Bavarian lagers emerged from the ice caves of the Alps above Munich, and this one is one of the first that was documented to be produced in the 1500s. We know that this style emerged sometime, this hybrid lager fermentation. It happened in Bavaria, happened in the 1500s. We don't know exactly when, but we know it began to be commercialized by the end of that century and became very popular, because at the time, I'm sure it tasted cleaner, right? Compared to some of the other funky, sludgy stuff that I'm sure was happening long before we had modern hygiene, right? Now, this style didn't actually become widely popularized until we start getting into the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when we start being able to mass produce glass, when beer starts being able to be shipped longer distances and it's not just being made at each tavern for that local neighborhood. That's when things really start to change. And that's when the Germans really pioneered the style of what we now know as Helles lager after the innovation of pale malting, which happened in Britain. They took that and ran with it. You know, they were like, oh, let's combine that pale malt with our cold lagering process. And now, holy shit, we've really got something. Now, of course, the Czech Pilsners were a part of this as well, but that's kind of at a time before modern Germany as we know it was really organized as a country. Bohemia, which is, you know, where the Pilsen city is located, it's adjacent to Bavaria. Bohemia and Bavaria were kind of rival kingdoms, like princedoms, right next to each other. So it's kind of, when I say German styles, I don't mean to exclude the Czech Republic. I kind of think of it as German-speaking Europe, right? Like think about all the parts of like Denmark, for example, Switzerland, parts of France, northern Italy.
Central Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Where German is spoken. That's kind of what I mean when I'm saying German styles, right? This lagering caught on there. And of course, soon came to the New World, right? Like this is an example with the Yuengling Porter. This is not bad beer. I know so many people in the craft beer world just don't even think about, and I see them walk right past the Yuengling station.
No, I was excited when you brought this in.
I see them do that. This is the best beer they make. It is made. It's basically an American version of Kostritzer Schwarzbier. It's more like a Thuringian black lager and less like a British porter, which is why it's so crisp and clean. And then I brought kind of an example of what Philly's doing now with the Tamavi 13 from Human Robot. This is one of the better black or dark lagers being made in the United States. They are overtly modeling on the Czech style. But tasting these three side by side should be super interesting. Hope you guys are up for it.
I'm ready.
Yeah. I hope somebody has an opener because I didn't bring one.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Got it.
Now, the thing I love about Munich Dunkel as a sommelier, as somebody who came up recommending drinks with food, this is probably the most under-recognized food partner beer there is. Because it's kind of an obscure style. If you're not already a fan of German beers, a Dunkel lager is kind of obscure. But what you get here, I mean, just notice... You've got this tension between sweetness and dryness that ends dry. And that's really important for food because that's what makes you hungry. That's what makes you thirstier. If it ends sweet, you're kind of not as interested in the next bite of food, right? But what this does is it works so well with anything that's got a lot of fat, a lot of salt. Like it's making you hungrier and thirstier.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why wine has traditionally been like a food pairing? Because wine is just way drier than
wine
beers?
Does that better, but it's not the sweetness, it's the acid.
Okay.
The thing that wine does better than beer, speaking as a wine partisan here for a second, both can do pairings brilliantly, of course.
Yeah.
But wine's superpower is also its Achilles heel, okay? Wine's sky-high levels of acidity make your mouth water. They make you hungrier and thirstier right there. And salt and acid counteract each other on the palate.
Yeah.
So when you are tasting food that seems too salty, one sip of something acidic like wine makes the food taste less salty and lets all the other flavors come forward.
Cool.
But the salt in the food is also making your wine taste less acidic. So the two together have this, wine and food have a more dramatic difference in the way they taste together and apart than beer and food.
Got it.
Because most beers are not acidic. They get their refreshment from carbonation. It has a similar effect in counteracting this the saltiness, but it's not quite as effective, right?
Yeah, we just had
it doesn't change the character of the beer.
Tom Peters on, and he brought all of his lambics and gooses in, and I think that a lot of those types of beers pair the same way wines pair with food.
He was cheating. He was trying to get that wine level of acidity into the pairings. And I'm sorry, I'm teasing. But basically, the acidity, there's a reason why every restaurant in the world has a wine list and a sommelier, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just the French restaurants and the Italian restaurants, places where they've been making wine for millennia, right? It's also the Japanese restaurants, and it's also like the Swedish restaurants. And it's because wine sets your palate up for food in a way that beer can do, but beer also fills you up at the same time, right? Yeah. Beer occupies more space in the belly, number one.
Yeah, it's got gas.
And it's carbonated, which makes it kind of expand. Wine, you take much smaller sips, and that acidity, boom, you've got much more, you've got the ability to do more back to back wine and food pairings in the course of a great dinner. If you try to do that with beer, you tap out by number 3 or 4,
Makes
right?
sense.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so what do you guys think about this?
I mean, I drink this beer a lot, but I love it.
Yeah, it's one of my go-to. any German beer garden, honestly.
Well, in these kinds of what I love about lagers is that they scour the palate clean. Like you get that kind of scrubbing bubbles feel that is sometimes a little harder to find in ales. You don't get, because there's so much else happening. It can be a big distraction. For me, the way these just finish so freaking clean.
And I love Pilsners because you get the hop flavor, but then the dark lagers, they have just a lot more flavor.
Malt focus, right? So all the hop here is bitter hop, basically.
Yeah.
There's very little aromatic hop impact. But as long as you like malt, you're going to like this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it does have depth. Like it finishes clean, but there still is a lot of flavor there.
Right. And so now let's just come right off of that and go straight into the Yuengling Porter. And we are now talking about a difference of price point and accessibility level. Like let's be fair to this beer. This is probably a third of the price of the Hofbrau. Much, much darker. You can see you get the black style.
Yeah.
This is more Schwarzbier than Dunkel. Get a little bit of roastiness on the nose.
It's great.
But I swear to God, the reason why so many people are so hard on this beer is that they think they're trying to compare it to a stout or trying to compare it to a porter because that's what it says on the label.
Why didn't you think that they changed it? Because I thought that was until you brought these beers in today, I thought this was an actual porter.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
They have kept the name because when they created this beer in 1829, the style is a German Schwarzbier.
Yeah.
But we're dealing with a largely English-speaking audience.
Yeah.
So back at that time, the other popular black beer was porter, and they just used that name.
Wow.
And and when you've done something for more than 100 years, you don't change it lightly. They're not going to just suddenly start calling this black lager, right? Just because it's more fashionable now, right? But when you evaluate this beer as a lager, understanding that it's a lager, you start to see why all those guys were drinking this stuff back then, right? Because it is extremely well made.
I think it's better than this, honestly.
It has a little more. I feel like there's a little more depth to it.
Yeah. It's still dry though. It's like it's just a fuller beer.
This stuff is super easy to drink. There's a little more sweetness lingering to it down the sides of the tongue for me.
Yeah.
That to me calls for certain kinds of foods more than others. Like I'm more likely to go for this if I'm eating something Asian that's got some kind of sugar in the marinade or something with ketchup or barbecue sauce or something like that. I'm more likely to go here. This I think has a little more range because it's so much drier. You could do that with anything. Like you could do that with a piece of striped bass. You could do that with a steak. You could go anywhere.
Yeah.
This one is a little more limiting just because of that richness to it.
Okay.
But damn if it's not a good beer. And it drives me crazy that people do not take Yuengling seriously for their history, for their heritage, and they do know how to make good beer. They really do. They have always been focused on value, and they do not apologize for it. They want to make sure that everyone can afford their beer, right? And I think that this is an overlooked treasure here that we have in our area for sure.
Definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, dark lagers in general are coming back. They need to do a marketing refresh. It's like
I'm working on it. I'm trying to get lager lovers of the world unite. Right? That's kind of the whole concept behind Beer Fest.
Yeah.
Too. Is just to get people thinking about these styles as a unit, as a group. Like, what is it that they do so well? And I'm sure you've seen this too. As you move around the beer scene, there are people who love every style and have, a special place in their heart for pairing like this type with this kind of food and this type with this kind of food. And then there are people who are like stuck on one thing. You got the IPA guys who won't drink anything else. You got the Belgian Abbey beer people who won't do anything else. And there are people who won't drink anything other than lager, right? Now, often it's won't drink anything other than Pilsner, right? Like very specific, pale, hoppy lager. But I understand why. If you've gotten used to drinking beers that have that cleansing, that refreshment, and let's be frank, the low alcohol makes them easier to fit into a lot of people's lifestyle.
Yes.
I mean, for me, it's ironic, but in my business, I am super sensitive to alcohol. I can't drink as much as many people. So I want to enjoy every drink that I can have, and I would love to have something with low enough alcohol that I can have 2 instead of 1.
Yeah.
Right? And that, for a lot of my friends who are lager focused, that is the appeal for them. They want something cleansing. They want something that's great with food, but they also want something that they can have 2 or 3 or 4 and have it not catch up with them as quickly. And that's what I love. I mean, I think Human Robot is doing such a great job with this.
Yeah, they are.
This is they are helping to revitalize the image of lager brewing in a kind of fashionable way. Like, this is about as unfashionable as you can get right now, right? But this is super hot. I'm sorry, they're both good beers and very
they're really tight with the Seed from South Jersey, who just got ranked like the #1 dark lager producing brewery in the country.
This has got a lot more complexity to it, absolutely. But it's also, what they're doing is very specialty niche brewing, right? Like you could not do this on that scale.
No.
You couldn't, right? The fact that these guys are doing that.
Part of this product is that they're designing it like that.
Exactly. So anyhow, this is a great example of the kinds of things we do at Beer Fest, is try to share the story that Pennsylvanians and Philadelphians should be proud of in our city's German brewing heritage, popularizing lager, trying to get people to take it seriously again. I mean, when we first started, it was really uphill, but it was obvious to us back then that the brewers were going to need to start focusing on lagers too. Yes, it takes longer to brew, and there's cost associated with that in terms of equipment and tanks and storage and refrigeration capacity and all of that. However, you cannot tell me that it makes more business sense to cram more malt, more hops, more alcohol, more expensive ingredients into an ale and shove it out there into the market. Not only are you increasing the cost of the production through those ingredients, but you're also producing something that you can't have 3 of in one sitting. Like, there's a reason why for centuries the most popular beers have been lagers, and they've been modest in alcohol. They've been clean and cleansing. I'm sorry, but if it's not refreshing, is it still a refreshment? Right? Like, that is part of the definition to me of what beer needs to do, is to make you feel refreshed. And sometimes there's so many specialty products where I'm just like, yeah, sure, but I want a shot glass of this. Yeah. I don't want a pint of this.
Work well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am a lager evangelist. Yeah. I am a German style specialist. Of course, I teach about all styles of beer and wine and spirits and cocktails and all that stuff too. But as you can tell, I get passionate about these stories. And I was talking to the brewers of Pennsylvania because I really think, and I am not making this up, like, I've seen what the rest of the country has to offer in terms of beer. What we have in Pennsylvania is so unique. There are more brewers at every level, from like the giant Yuengling all the way down to the little mom and pop in Erie, PA, or Harrisburg or Philly, making damn good lager, good German style beer, or a Kolsch. If they can't manage a lager, they'll do their best with a cool temperature fermentation on an ale, which yields something in the Kolsch vein.
Yeah.
And we're the national leaders in lager brewing in the United States. Why are we not out there trumpeting that from the rooftops?
Yeah, between Yuengling and then also Sam Adams production is in Pennsylvania.
I know. The 2 largest American-owned breweries in the U.S. are both producing the majority of their beer here in northeastern Pennsylvania. And part of that is because the water there is really good for brewing lager. Part of it is because the people who live in Pennsylvania have German heritage, have expertise, have a taste for lager. I mean, we famously, you walk into a bar anywhere in Pennsylvania, ask for lager, and they assume you're talking about Yuengling because it's so familiar. It's their own home turf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's awesome. So I think that it's time for a Yay PA lager kind of a campaign. I'd love to gather some of the members of the Brewers of PA who focus on lagers, and especially those who sell it outside of the state, not just within the state, and maybe we take our big bouncing, beautiful baby beer fest and boil it down to a smaller little road show. And maybe we
won't talk about, we'll talk about it after the podcast, but we have something going on tomorrow that we're going to try to be pushing. But I guess this podcast can come out after that, but it's a good thing to be pushing Pennsylvania-made lagers, Pennsylvania-made German-style lagers right now. So this was a great conversation. You are an amazing teacher.
Thank you.
Great talker.
I love guests like you when you come on and just like honestly like a wealth of knowledge. I feel like you get personal learning.
Yeah.
Like we're really spoiled sometimes.
Yeah, the wine person comes in and teaches us about beer. This is fun.
Well, that's my job after all. I've been doing this for a few trips around the sun now, guys, and I'm pretty good at it. So I'm glad that we were able to share some stuff that you guys didn't know, and also taste to me, a little side-by-side tasting like this is just so illustrative.
Definitely.
This is in one flight, what we're trying to do at Beer Fest. It's everything that we're about.
Awesome. So we can support you by buying your book. Of course. She said beer, she said wine.
He said beer, she said wine. You can, of course, find that on Amazon. Or if you're curious, maybe I know there are a lot of beer people who want to dip a toe into the wine pool. The other book that I'm super famous for on the wine side is called Wine, A Tasting Course. And you guys would love it because it's designed for the ADD. It's a beginner primer. It's all infographic. There's no block of text longer than 400 words. Cool. And it is Marnie style education on wine that's designed to help people orient themselves to that giant confusing mass of products that we have. It's even more overwhelming in wine than it is in beer. Mm-hmm. So that book is a really great starting point.
Cool. And then we can find you online.
Of course, yeah. You can find my website at meetmarnieold.com.
Cool.
Unfortunately, I have there's a spoof stalker out there who has marnieold.com and trying to make my life difficult. So go to meetmarnieold.com and you'll find I have wine tutorials on YouTube. I created a whole series of Spanish wine education cartoons that are really fun. They're all linked on the website, and you can find out a lot more there.
Cool. Just Google your name. There's so much information for you.
Exactly.
But thank you again for coming on. This was a great conversation.
Oh, well, this was so much fun, guys. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation.
Of course. And then you can find us at Brewdat, at the Brewdat Podcast. And we'll see you. Subscribe on YouTube, and we'll see you guys next week.
Sweet.
Cool.